afternoon, and I am Paul Lambert, and I'm from the History and Political Science Department here at Nichols. And I want to begin by saying that this semester I'm teaching a course on World War II. And a couple of weeks ago, my students and I examined the use of propaganda as used by both the Axis and the Allies during the war. I showed the students part of an interview of the late journalist Bill Moyers that he conducted with Nazi filmmaker Fritz Hippler for his PBS series, A Walk Through the 20th Century, back in the 1980s. In that interview, Hippler stressed how important it was excuse me, when I edited my comments, I deleted something that I wasn't supposed to delete, and I didn't expect that. In that interview, Hippler stressed how important it was to make complicated ideas simple and to use powerful words and imagery that would help win the support of the German public. Hitler would produce an infamous documentary film in 1940 entitled The Eternal Jew, which likened German Jews to vermin. Repulsive images of scurrying rats were shown on a screen while the narrator commented, quote, "Wherever rats turn up, they spread annihilation throughout the land, destroying property and food supplies. This is how they disseminate disease, pestilence, leprosy, typhus, cholera, dysentery. Just like the Jews among mankind, rats represent the very essence of malicious and subterranean destruction," end quote. Films such as this would help prepare the way for the final solution to what the Nazis referred to as the quote-unquote Jewish problem. And as a result, 6 million Jews would be killed by the war's end in 1945. John Dower, in his 1986 book, War Without Mercy, has examined American and Japanese wartime propaganda, and similarly found frequent references to stereotypes and images that were put forward, and these were presented in writings, films, and cartoons printed in newspapers and shown in movie houses for the duration of the war. The purpose of such propaganda, argues Dower, was to make the enemy seem less human, perhaps even less than human, and therefore easier to attack. When I read the introduction to Mike's book, I was struck by the parallel that can be drawn between some of this World War II propaganda and by the words that have been used by the United States in its pursuit of certain enemies over the course of the past 125 years or so. I'll let Mike tell his own story, but what I will say is that he argues that the language the government has used in describing some of these enemies is carefully chosen. In his words, and I quote, "Terms connote criminality, incivility, and illegitimacy of both cause and means," end quote. This helps to justify the actions the U.S. decides to take or the manner in which it takes them. He uses a case study approach, looking at different situations the United States has faced since the end of the Spanish-American War in 1898, analyzing the rhetoric that has been used and the actions that have been taken. His conclusion is that our use of language has been closely connected with American attempts to rally popular support and to justify U.S. actions where it has had strategic interests throughout the 20th century, and that our current global war on terror is actually not a unique situation that can merely be traced back to the collapse of the World Trade Center towers in September 2001. Now, a word about our speaker. Mike Neagle is Professor of History at Nichols College, where he has been a member of the faculty since 2014. He serves as Director of the History and Political Science program, as well as co-chair of the programs in Media Studies and Terrorism Studies. He is also currently the Vice President of the New England Historical Association, a professional organization of historians from the region. He earned his bachelor's degree in history from the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester in 1998, and after working as a sports writer for newspapers in Ohio, New York State, and Rhode Island, and spending some time in public relations, he heard the call to practice the historian's craft and embarked on his second career. He would earn his master's degree and doctorate in history from the University of Connecticut at Storrs, where he worked under the direction of Dr. Frank Castigliola. Here at Nichols, Mike teaches courses in U.S. history, U.S. foreign policy, Latin American history, as well as the course that has arguably become the feature presentation in his course lineup, namely, The War on Terror. He has written articles for academic historical journals, as well as opinion pieces for newspapers like the Worcester Telegram and Gazette, and most recently, the Hartford Courant. He has also been a guest on local talk radio programs on WBZ in Boston and WATD in Marshfield. Mike's first book, America's Forgotten Colony, Cuba's Isle of Pines, was published in 2016. Today, he will discuss his new book, Chasing Bandits, America's Long War on Terror. And I just would like to note, I was particularly touched in the acknowledgments section where I got to see the importance of his dog, Rex. So he may decide to elaborate on that, but we get to hear more about the thesis of the book, I'm sure. Please welcome me in, please join me in welcoming Mike Neagle.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming out this afternoon to enjoy an afternoon with me. I guess afternoon with Dr. Neagle, that's me. Appreciate you guys coming out here. Paul, thank you very much for that introduction. I'm not sure how you did it, and I'm not sure how I should feel about being mentioned in the same breath as Hitler. But I'll take the John Dower comparison. That's I do appreciate that. I just want to make sure I'm keeping track of my own time, that I don't go too long. I also want to thank Carrie and Sarah for the invitation to come here to talk about the book. They were both very helpful to me, and I'll talk about sources and all that kind of stuff, how the library was helpful to me in a little bit. But thank you very much for hosting this turnout. I have some family that I should point out. My mother and father are here. Thomas and Elda Neagle, they're mentioned in the book too. But thank you for coming. And a couple of alums as well. Jack Champagne came by, I haven't seen him in a few years. Tom Cunningham, I don't know, he's here somewhere. He's in the upper deck. Yeah, there's seats in the upper deck too, if anybody wants. So I appreciate the alums coming out for this as well. And of course to all of you current, former students, my colleagues and staff here at the college. I appreciate you guys coming out. So I'm just going to kind of talk semi-informally about the book, some kind of broad ideas. I can definitely get into the weeds on some things during the Q&A session if anybody has any questions on it. So I'll probably talk maybe about 25-30 minutes and then hopefully get some questions for the remainder of our time here. And this is all going to be about this book that many of you have heard about me talking about for years and years and years. 8 years, as a matter of fact, that it took me to work on this. Chasing Bandits came out this month with University of North Carolina Press. And this is a topic that I did not realize would have so much contemporary relevance, like right now in November 2025 with stuff happening near Venezuela. That was the subject of the Hartford Courant op-ed that I just did earlier this week. I can talk about that as well. But this story that I have here, or the multiple stories that I have here, I think can give a little bit more historical context to what's happening right now. But what I really try to do with Chasing Bandits is to reframe the 21st century global war on terror to really show that it's not unique in American history. And indeed, it's had important utility, I think, in the development of the American empire over the course of the last 125 years or so. These are things that I will try to parse out and help to explain a little bit more as I go on here. But I'd like to start by reading a little bit from the opening of the book, because I think it gives a good brief overview about the story that I'm looking to tell here. This is actually Paul's copy because it's all marked up, but that's okay. I know the material. The world had never seen anything quite like it before. The September 11th, 2001 attack on the United States was the deadliest terrorist operation of all time, killing nearly 3,000 people. Much of the violence and destruction was captured on live television and would be replayed over and over for all to see. Although nationals of more than 80 countries died that day, the mission was aimed primarily against Americans. The nation was left stunned, saddened, fearful, and angry. In response, President George W. Bush called for a global war on terror, ostensibly to punish the planners, suspected to be part of Osama bin Laden's al-Qaeda network based in Afghanistan, and to prevent anything like 9/11 from happening again. This will be a different type of war than we're used to. This is a different type of enemy than we're used to, Bush warned. But the world had seen the United States engage in such wars and pursue such enemies before, many times. Since the turn of the 20th century, the United States has been involved in a variety of operations to hunt down the same kinds of foreign foes as it has in the global war on terror. Before the chase for bin Laden in Afghanistan, there were grueling military campaigns in the Philippines, Mexico, and Nicaragua, as well as covert missions in Bolivia and Colombia. In these cases, the enemies were non-state actors, meaning they did not formally represent the countries from which they hailed or fought. These adversaries often operated in the shadows, employed a small cadre of loyal fighters, and nursed diverse grievances against U.S. policy that compelled them to threaten or perpetrate violence in the name of their respective causes. Their challenges to U.S. interests and security earned them Americans' wrath within a framework that has maintained a remarkable consistency over time. The words used to describe them provide clear illustrations of this continuity. In the past, the danger was often couched in the language of the bandit, savage, or guerrilla. In the present, the term most frequently used is terrorist. Although there are certainly important distinctions among these terms, such meanings in popular discourse have been essentially the same. The terms connote criminality, incivility, and illegitimacy of both cause and means. Now, this book is less concerned about whether the individuals considered here should be labeled bandits or terrorists. I take it as a given that many Americans in their time presumed they were. Rather, I explore how and why they were framed that way, as well as the broader consequences of that depiction. To that end, I maintain that these pejorative descriptions have had two distinct utilities. One, to rally popular and political support in the United States by intimating cultural distinctions that suggested or reinforced a sense of American superiority. And two, to justify incursions abroad that provided the United States with more influence in places of strategic interest. So that's from the introduction, and I just wanted to share that to give you a sense, I think, of what the book is intended to cover. So I wanted to talk just a little bit here, did that already, talk about the origins of the project. This is something Professor Lambert alluded to, is that this came from an initial version of History 210, which I know many in the room have taken, my class on the War on Terror. It's a class that I started teaching when I arrived here in 2014. And that class at the time, there were a lot of students for whom the War on Terror, and more specifically, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the attack on 9/11, this was something that was in the lived memory of many of my students in 2014. Less so now. I find that the older I get, the younger they get. It's funny how these things happen, but that's how the class started. And initially, the class did not even get to 9/11 until about midway through the semester. So I had a lot of students who were like, well, this is a class on the War on Terror, where the hell's 9/11? Like, okay, well, we're going to get to it. But I wanted to provide, and the purpose of the class was to try to historicize the global war on terror in a little bit more deeply. And as I was researching how to teach this class, I kept coming across other instances of these kinds of wars, these kinds of enemies. And that was really the genesis of this book. My class has adapted and morphed over the years, but I thought that there was something there in this story to tell, trying to historicize the global war on terror. This was also written primarily for an audience of undergraduates. It was many of you in this room who I had in mind as I was writing this. So even though it's with an academic press, and there are going to be other historians and professors who read through and parse this and criticize it and so forth, the main audience is undergraduate students, to hopefully get a better sense of the global war on terror and its kind of broader implications. And by extension, also general readers. You don't have to have a PhD or an advanced degree in history to follow this, at least I hope not. It was written kind of more with a general audience in mind as well. And this is stemming from, as Professor Lambert mentioned, I used to be a newspaper reporter in another life, so writing for a broader audience is something that I've been used to doing. So how did I put this together? A whole variety of different sources here. So I bring in published primary sources, speeches and letters, documents, things like that. A lot of digitized newspapers throughout the 20th century. Those are some of probably the two key things: the published primary sources and these digitized newspapers. I did some archival research. I went to the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., but that wasn't the big thing. My first book, that was all archival stuff, which I can talk about too. But in terms of sources, a lot of things that I used were things that I could just read through and examine in my office. Interlibrary loan was a big thing. As Sarah can attest, a lot of interlibrary loan where I got books from other institutions over here, so I could literally sit at my desk in my office and do research from this book. And that was also a matter of practicality, because here at Nichols I'm teaching 4 classes a semester, don't have a whole ton of research funding to go around the world to do all these things. I have to bring things to me. And so that is one of the benefits of operating in the 21st century with all this digitization, is that all this kind of stuff can be right there at my fingertips. And the other reason I kind of took this source approach in terms of my methodology here is I'm mostly focusing on the rhetoric. What did people say? How did they say it? What's the context in which they said these things? And so I tried to read that very, very closely, and having these kinds of sources was tremendously helpful. This book took me about 8 years to write. I started writing it in 2017 after I finished up my first book, America's Forgotten Colony, available right there. Gotta sell. But I started working on this in about 2017. I had a couple of research associates who were helping me with some of my initial research, trying to figure out what exactly do I have. And so I know they're out here, but Ben Davidson was my first research assistant, and Michaela Gamache was my other research assistant in the early days. So I was still trying to figure out what exactly do I have. I think I have something, but I'm not quite sure what it is. So basically, it would take me I would write about a chapter a year. That was kind of the pace that I was at. And I've got 6 case studies plus an introduction and conclusion, just to kind of give you a sense of why this took me so long. I was able to knock out 2 chapters in the spring of 2022 when I was on sabbatical. My dog Rex helped keep me on pace, because between his frequent snoozes, I could just research and write. So he was actually helpful. So that's a little bit about sources. And then in terms of the publishing experience, how do you get one? You can write all this stuff, but it's got to be published somehow, some way, by hopefully something reputable. And I was fortunate to work with the University of North Carolina Press. This is one of the top academic presses in my field. So not just as a historian, but more specifically as a historian of American foreign policy. UNC Press is one of the top ones to work with. The editor I worked with there, she was working at Cambridge when I did my first book. So she helped me get the first book. She moved to UNC Press. We had talked about what's my next project, keep me in mind. And so at UNC, she's like, yeah, this is great. Give me a proposal. Let's work through this. And so I could talk about that process if anybody's interested in that whole academic writing process. But she was an important conduit to this as well. All right, so what else is this about? Well, I have a couple of key arguments here that I just wanted to kind of bring to the surface at this point. Really two that I want to highlight. And the first is that the global war on terror is not unique in U.S. history. You know, contrary to what President Bush said all those years ago, you know, the United States has indeed fought these kinds of wars and fought these kinds of enemies before. And I also make the point that these conflicts, I think, have actually been useful to the development of American imperialism. Because one of the things that I think this book sits at is this nexus of terrorism and imperialism. I've always been fascinated by the concept of American empire. That's what the first book's about. That's what this book is also about. And these kinds of stories all take place as the United States is growing and maintaining its influence around the world. And so that's one aspect of this, that the global war on terror is not unique and that it indeed has some sort of utility to American empire. And I think another argument that I have here is the rhetoric is a really important through line in all of these chapters. I mean, these are disparate chapters, different people, different places around the world, but I think there is a connecting line here, and I think the rhetoric is a big part of this. Some of the terms that come out in these different chapters are bandit, terrorist, savage, outlaw, guerrilla, narco-terrorist, all these things. And yes, they're all different terms, they have different contexts, but I do try to make the case that they really mean the same kinds of things. They basically mean criminality, incivility, illegitimacy of both cause and means. And I think if you could transport somebody like Pancho Villa in Mexico, I'll talk about him more in a moment, but somebody who attacks the United States in 1916, if you could transport him to 2025, people would call him a terrorist. And I think conversely, if you could transport Osama bin Laden back to 1899, he wouldn't be called a terrorist, he'd be called a bandit. So I think there's important similarities here. And that's one of the things that historians are trying to do, is assess change or continuity over time. And I would make the case that this rhetoric is a continuity over time. So in terms of the organization of this, yes, there are 6 case studies that I have in here. I also have a short 7th one in the conclusion, about the ISIS leader Baghdadi, which I can talk about too in the Q&A. So I want to give just a quick sketch of these 6 individuals that I spotlight in the book. This is the first one, Emilio Aguinaldo in the Philippines. Now, the thing about Aguinaldo is that he, for a time, had been an ally of the United States. The United States in 1898 is going to go to war with Spain, and this is going to